Hello everyone, welcome to video 4 in this multi-video series. In the last video we left off talking about how there might be a difference between a finite or infinite past history versus a infinite or finite past. In this video we're going to start off talking about that and then jump into the Grim Reaper paradox and potential solutions.
If you're just talking about the past, you can have like points in the past where the time kind of like resets. And so um, basically, to interpret into Proust's language, to go like this. Instead of like A being caused by B, which is caused by C, which is caused by D, you have like this infinite regress. Suppose you just have like A is caused by B, and C is caused by D, and D is caused by E, and there's some quasi-relation between them, but they're not like fully connected. And that would be like in the sense that um, using like the Big Bang, Big Crunch example I think we talked about earlier, suppose the same matter, energy, and all that are the same, but like the way in which matter arranged from at the end of universe one before it crunches doesn't end up mattering because it becomes a singularity, and so it's not really going to affect like how it expands for universe two or something like that. Um, and so in this case, you can have like an infinite number of connected nodes. They're just not all connected into like one single causal chain.
Let's talk about that a little bit because I can see an objection being along the lines of, okay, well, just because we don't have knowledge of this causal chain, it doesn't, like, our knowledge isn't the stopping point. There's something, like, metaphysically problematic about having, like, an infinite causal chain.
Yeah, it's more than just our knowledge. Like there has to actually be a reset in there. There has to be something about a Big Bang, Big Crunch that's more than just like we don't know what the previous one was, but more like it actually doesn't matter. So the point here is like it's not that we don't know what the previous universe was like, it's that it could have been like a trillion different ways, and we'd still get this universe regardless. So it's not just that we don't know it; it's that whatever it was, it doesn't end up mattering. I think that the exact words I would use was it's like imagine the previous matter, energy, whatever in the previous universe when it collapses in the singularity. It just kind of like shakes everything up like Yahtzee dice and rolls again. The previous roll of the dice doesn't matter. You're putting in the cup, you're shaking, and you're getting like a different roll entirely. Is how it ends up going. So it is kind of like a hard reset, not just in knowledge, but like physically.
Okay, so then what would you say if, well, what did you say? I raise an objection, something along the lines of, okay, so every, however often there's one of these resets, right? Well, why are we
Mm-hmm.
in the current reset as opposed to any of the past ones, right? If there's an infinite number in the past, don't we just run into the same problem again?
If like you have to get through one reset before you get to another reset, then yes, you definitely have that problem. Like if you have to go through interval one before you can get to interval two, before you can get to interval three, then exactly right. That's where you get to like the movie theater example, where like you have to know what happens in the first however many movies before you can understand what happens in this movie. But the point of the reset is it's supposed to be like the second movie analogy, where a movie theater is showing an infinite number of movies, but you don't have to know what happens in any other movie to know what happens in this movie. Um, and so this will make shows a happy. There could be like some randomness relation where um, at the end of one universe, maybe some new universe is picked at random, and maybe you get repeats, not like sequential repeats, but like um, some universal arc happens, and then like 10,224 times later, by random chance, that exact same kind of historical arc just happens again. So you don't like have to get through any number of them to see the one you're in. It always could have come up after any one of them.
All right, so at this point we got a little bit sidetracked, so I'm going to just cut ahead to bringing it back to how it relates to the Coulomb cosmological argument.
I mean, the Kalam, whichever version you're looking at, there's like tons of different versions of the Kalam, but what they all have in common is um, the past has to have a beginning. Basically, that's what makes the Kalam, and not some other argument. Is like that crucial premise. The past began, and so we have to talk about its cause. Um, and so the idea here is, if hard causal finitism is true, right, the metaphysical kind, then um, insofar as each event is dependent on its past events, well, it can only be dependent on a finite number of things, and therefore the past must be finite, so it can only depend on a finite number of things. If my weaker version of causal finitism is true, then it doesn't mean the past is infinite. It just means that every event can only depend on a finite number of what I call historical events, like events relating to its being the case. Um, but you can still have an infinite number of past events that aren't histories, right? So you can have like an infinite number of finite past histories, is the way that I say it. And now the crucial premise of the Kalam, like, does the past have a beginning? Well, no, it doesn't. That's kind of thwarted because the past could go on forever. Well, now the question is, and this is what I tackle at the end of my paper for relay theology. The question is, well, what if we shift the Kalam then to saying something like every past history has a cause, right? And everything that begins to exist has a cause. A particular past history, even if not the past itself, begins to exist, and therefore that past history will have a cause. Um, therefore, um, let's start talking about the cause, and you get to the rest of the Kalam stuff, right? So you just substitute like the past for like the historical past, and basically like navigate my sleight of hand here. Um, the issue with that is now when you get to the gap argument, because let's suppose my model's right, and there's a potentially infinite number of past histories here, right? There's no limit to them, but they have the same cause. Well, they have the same being that's actually causing all these past histories. But one of the things that's crucial to my model is that none of the past histories can relate to each other, right? So if we use the same movie theater example, like the movies could have the same director, cast, characters, like they could be made of the same stuff, but the stories shouldn't like relate to each other. You shouldn't be able to say like um something about the previous movies explains why something about the current movie is on the screen. Else to fully figure that out, you have to kind of go backwards and get the mess. Well, now apply that to God, right? So God is or the cause. I mean, we can make it general. It doesn't matter. I'll just call the cause God. Um, so if the cause is causing all these histories, right? Well, we have kind of a dilemma because you know how I like dilemmas. Either the cause is causing them at random, right? God's causing them randomly, in which case, um, what work is God doing over and above just some fundamental randomness assumption, right? The idea is God should be an agent. God should be a person. God should like be something over and above randomness substantially to make it work. So, if you take the randomness horn, God's kind of superfluous. And if you're going over and above randomness, like God is choosing each history, like he's curating which one comes next. Well, now we have an issue, right? Because something about all the previous causal histories is is influencing God's curating the next one, right? And so how many causal histories might have been before ours? Well, according to my model, an infinite number of them, right? And so God's curating an infinite number of causal histories before ours is influencing his curating this one. But what does that violate? That violates causal finitism because um, God's, God now has an infinite number of past influences that all work together uh, to influence what he's doing with our causal history. Like our history happens because, in some sense, if it's agential and not random, because God has this experience with all these past events. Well, if we went through all this hassle to adhere to causal finitism in the first place, the last thing you're going to do is break it, right? That just defeats the entire purpose. And so they can't take that horn of the dilemma either. If God's an agent, all his decision making is influenced by his previous decisions. That means an infinite number of his causing past histories. Um, that violates causal finitism. And if it's random, God's superfluous. And so I think that dilemma, really shoots down the Kalam there because they can't even just like repeat the argument with a single past history if there is indeed an infinite number of them. And so causal finitism in that vein isn't just like some way to smuggle in the Kalam. It's now a weapon like against the Kalam if people want to use it that way. Because once you've got the model set up, there's now certain things you just can't have God doing.
Your model is one in which there is a, let's just call it a universe, right? And then
Yep.
there's a break, and then there's another universe, and like the material from universe one can carry forward to universe two, but there's some process that makes it so these are not like directly causally related.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah. And that's just an example. Like that's just like a purely physical because people kind of understand the Big Bang, Big Crunch. It could be complicated. It could be something like at the level of possible worlds. There might be some modal physics I don't fully understand that makes it so possible worlds can't exist forever or something, and so causal worlds are just coming into and out of existence all the time. And maybe they're just independent of any other ones that have come into or out of existence, right? I don't know. I mean, it could be all kinds of crazy. The primary question I'm concerned with is there a way you can have an infinite number of stuff while navigating the constraints causal finitism puts on us and how we talk about it? And this is just like a way we could do it.
Now, I can imagine someone raising an objection, sort of like, well, okay, but the reason that we accept causal finitism is that we want a simple answer. And now you're sort of postulating an infinite causal finitism reality. Doesn't that seem to make things more complex? So, like, what is the response here?
Okay, the simplicity is for like, um, do I have a way to solve paradox one? Sure, here's some ad hoc way for paradox one. And then here's another way, ad hoc way for paradox two, another ad hoc way for paradox three, and so on, right? Um, the simplicity here is, do I have one solution that makes it so we don't have to keep track of this giant stack of ad hoc solutions for each individual paradox? Um, and my model doesn't really interrupt that, right? Like, causal finitism solves all the paradoxes. The only thing we're quibbling over is like, what's the way in which causal finitism solves the paradoxes? So like, for the Grim Reaper paradox, you could say that causal finitism solves it by having a finite number of Reapers. You could also implement the angel solution, which is basically exactly what I've said about, you know, resets and new intervals and all the stuff we've been talking about. I've actually systematized that into the Grim Reaper paradox, and it solves that paradox. Um,
Yeah, so
and so it's still.
can we
Mhm.
let's just talk about that briefly. So the Grim Reaper paradox is that like at um there are these infinite number of Grim Reapers and they all want to kill Fred, but they
Right.
only kill Fred if the Reaper before them hasn't killed Fred, correct?
Yeah, it's an if and only if. So if Fred's not dead, somebody better kill him. But you're only going to kill him if you're the first one to do so. In so many words, I don't remember exactly the way they phrase it. It's kind of technical, but like that's the gist, right? Only kill him if you're the first one. But if he's alive, somebody better kill him.
All right, so there are a couple of things worth noting here. So first, there are multiple variations of Grim Reaper paradoxes. We tackle one specific common version here, but you might see like slight variations if you look at various YouTube videos, blog posts, whatever. Um, the other thing worth noting is what these Grim Reaper paradoxes is trying to do, right? Which, as Logos was talking about, basically it's this paradox in which the Reapers have to kill Fred, but they can't kill Fred. So how does that look like? Um, so basically, imagine that we have like a series of Reapers, and the Reaper one, right, or like the last Reaper, right? If he notices Fred is alive, he kills Fred. But then the Reaper preceding him does the exact same thing, and the Reaper preceding that Reaper does the exact same thing. So, for example, imagine that it's 1 o'clock, and we have Reaper one, and this would be like the last Reaper, right? So then we would say, if if Reaper one notices Fred is alive, he will kill Fred. But then we also have like Reaper two, and Reaper two comes at 12:30, and if he notices Fred is alive, then he kills Fred, and then we would have Reaper three at 12:15, and we can keep dividing the time interval in the past infinitely, such that we never quite reach midnight. We just get infinitely close. And the problematic like paradox here that seems to be going on is, well, we can ask the question, is Fred alive or is Fred dead? And if Fred is dead, we should be able to answer, well, which Reaper killed Fred, right? And if Fred is alive, it's like, well, shouldn't a Reaper have killed Fred? We've reached 1 o'clock, and a Reaper should have noticed that Fred was alive and killed him, right? And so it's unclear whether or not Fred is alive or dead, and which Reaper is responsible for killing Fred. And so the causal finitist will look at this paradox and say, this doesn't seem right. This isn't how reality works, right? And so their answer is, well, we just can't divide the number of events in the past infinitely, right? We can't have this infinite number of Reapers. There has to be a finite start point.
Um, and so the idea is you have, yeah, exactly. You have an infinite number of Reapers coming to kill him, and you could set them up kind of like the lamp paradox, or all sorts of ways. Like the Grim Messenger version, for example, has them spread out over an infinite past, whereas the usual one has the Reapers kind of condensed into the lamp scenario, where like Fred's gonna die between 12 a.m. and 1 a.m. or something, and so um, the first Reaper will come to kill Fred at well, no, the last Reaper will come to kill Fred at 12:30, and the one before that will come at 12:15, and the one before that will come at blah 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 blah. And so the question is, like, if it, pick any time interval. Let's just pick like 12:07.5. Just ask, is Fred alive or is Fred dead? And no matter what you answer, you're going to run into trouble. You're going to run into a cannot but must paradox. Like, he must die, but he cannot die. Why? Well, okay, so let's suppose he's alive at 12:07.5. What does that mean? Well, that means he was also alive at the time before that, so some Reaper should have killed him, right? If he was alive before then, he should have been killed by that time's Reaper. So he should be dead. Like, he should be dead at this time. Like, what if he's alive? He should be dead. What's the deal? But then you go back to the previous time and say, well, Reaper, why didn't you kill him? The Reaper goes, well, you see, I wasn't the first one. There's a Reaper before me who was supposed to do the job, right? I can only kill him if no other Reaper's done it yet. If I'm the first who would have done it, right? So talk to the people before me. Why didn't they do it? They go one back and talk to that Reaper. It's like, he was alive at your time, Reaper. At 12:03.75 or whatever. He's alive at your time. Why didn't you kill him? Oh, well, I wasn't the first one. There's a Reaper before me who didn't do it, right? So no matter where you go back in the chain, there's always some Reaper that was supposed to have killed him. And
Right.
yet, at every time in the chain, he was supposed to have been dead. He's not dead. Somebody freaking kill him. I'm God. I'm pissed at Fred. No matters. Somebody just kill him. Um, and so that's the cannot but must paradox. And it's because there's like an if and only if there for the thing, right? So one way to solve it would be, well, there's only a finite number of Reapers. If 5 Reapers come to kill Fred, the very first Reaper is going to see Fred and just axe him because there's no Reaper before him he can appeal to say, that's his job, right? So half the paradox kind of hinges on the fact that there's like a trail of past Reapers who are supposed to have done it. And so, everybody can always pass the buck. So if there's a finite number, that goes away. The first Reaper does it. The other Reapers just kind of check and make sure, yeah, he's dead. It's fine.
Yeah.
So
And so like the proponent of the Kalam will argue that like this is just another like a paradox like this, just like any of the other paradoxes we've talked about, is another reason like why we should accept like a causally finitist
right,
solution. Uh, but
right.
but your point here with your angel solution, this like break in the causal chain is, well, it's not the only solution, right? You can
It's not the only causal finitist solution, even.
right,
Yeah. So my angel solution is, well, let's suppose that for every Reaper that's come to kill Fred, God's like, I'm a merciful man, but also I kind of want God to suffer, right? And so for every angel that comes to kill Fred, there's some probability that that angel could be replaced with a Reaper. It's like a probability of like 0.0001 or something crazy low. You can pick the number. Um, and now let's pick a time. Let's suppose that Fred's alive at 12:07.5. And now we ask, well, why is Fred alive at 12:07.5? Well, before we have this cannot but must paradox where like he should be killed at this time. Like the Reaper before here should have killed him. Why is he alive? Well, now we've got like a whole bunch of solutions in our quivers. The first one is that well, what if the Reaper that appears to Fred at that time is an angel and he has just been revived, right? Um, so right. So I said Reapers have a probability for being replaced with angels, but I'm kind of scattered, right? The angels, what they do is they resurrect Fred if he's dead, and they kind of wipe the slate clean as far as like Reapers who saw him first. So let's suppose that like um at 12:15, an angel revives Fred. Well, then when the Reaper comes at 12:30, it will look to them as if they are the first Reaper to approach Fred. They won't say, well, it's some other Reaper's job. They'll say, oh, some angel jerk just revived my boy here. I'm gonna cut him down. And he's just gonna do it, and so it resets the index, and it makes Fred alive if he was dead. And this violates one of the conditions of the paradox, which says that if Fred's dead, he stays dead, right? So, and this goes to show that there's some subtle things. You don't have to say, well, there's like there's like the Fred rule, the Reaper rules to kill Fred, the infinite Reapers, and the if Fred stays dead. People say, well, we're going to keep the rules because there's nothing wrong with the rules. They work for finite Reapers. And so you can with the infinite Reaper part. So you have like the unsatisfiable pair people. They say that like the infinite Reapers and the rule are inconsistent, and we're just going to leave it at that. We can talk about that later. My solution is, well, wait a second. What about the if Fred steady stays dead clause? We can actually like end that, put these angel things in here, and then what happens is whenever Fred's alive, either A, he was just revived by an angel, like he's revived because an angel just revived him, or B, what if he was revived by an angel just before that Reaper got to him? So Fred's alive at 1207.5 because a Reaper's about to kill him because a previous Reaper revived him. That's not a contradiction either. And then you solve the problem. And so the question is like, okay, how is this consistent with causal finitism? Well, it's consistent with causal finitism because a Reaper coming to kill Fred isn't checking to see that none of the other infinite Reapers before him did their jobs, right? Which is what the paradox usually is done by. You can use Murphy's Law. Murphy's Law just says anything that has anything that can happen will happen. And since there is a chance that some previous Reaper is going to be replaced with an angel, go back a sufficiently large number of Reapers, we have infinite ones to pick from, you're going to get an angel somewhere. And so Murphy's Law guarantees you not only the existence of like one angel, but an infinite number of angels somewhere. Um, it also guarantees you that like you'll always have like a finite intervals of Reapers and angels. Um, maybe they're random lengths, these intervals, but that's okay. That's not a problem for us. And so the idea here is now what you've just got is you've got like these cycles of like Reaper, 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 Angel, Reaper, 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 Angel, Reaper, Angel, Reaper, Reaper, Angel, whatever. Like these this random Morse code gibberish of Reapers and Angels. And so now the paradox is diverted, and what's going on is Fred's being alive or dead, whichever one, whatever Fred's causal state now, is dependent on finitely many checks, right? So a Reaper comes to kill Fred. He's going to look back in his log, back to the nearest angel that revived him, because the angel erases all information before that, right? That's important. Here erases all information before that angel revived him and says, oh, hey, looks like I'm the first one that gets to kill the guy. Nice. Cuts him down, right? And then every Reaper after is going to look and say, oh, looks like the previous guy killed him until an angel revives Fred again, and so on. So at every point, you're still only checking a finite number of information. And so like each interval is now referencing only itself, which has a finite number of elements. And yet you still have an infinite number of Reapers, right? So this is just to show that Reapers and angels, an infinite number of stuff going on. So this is just to show that like causal finitist solutions to the paradox don't have to make the Reapers like finite. You don't have to do that. So is causal finitism simple? Yes, because what causal finitism predicts is it's a hypothesis that will solve all these hypotheses like super nicely without having to appeal to a bunch of ad hoc things for each paradox, right? Given any paradox involving infinite number of stuff, I think there'll be some causal finitist solution. What that looks like is up to human ingenuity. But I can predict certain things about what the solution is going to demand. And that'll be far easier than making like a very paradox specific solution. And so it still keeps its simplicity. It's just that we have a wide berth in like how we get to use the tool.
All right, so just a quick recap here because I know we've covered a lot. So there are these various paradoxes that occur, and then there are different ways of solving them. So the causal infinitist might solve these paradoxes by tailoring a custom solution to each paradox. So this would look like we have paradox 1, 2, and 3, and you would have solution A, solution B, and solution C. Solution A would go to paradox 1, solution B would go to paradox 2, and solution C would go to paradox 3, right? And this is nice because you're able to maintain the ability to talk about reality. You're not constrained by like a general rule, but it's not super parsimonious, which is why the causal finitists, they look at this, they don't like having, all of these ad hoc solutions, so they want to come up with a general rule that they can apply to solve all these paradoxes. And so the rule that they come up with is you can only have a finite number of causes. So basically what Logos is saying here is that, yeah, we have our two main camps that already exist, right? The ad hoc solutions camp and the one rule camp, and he's sort of saying that, well, the ad hoc camp is not great because it's not super parsimonious, but the one rule camp isn't that great either because it limits our ability to talk about reality the way we might want to. So maybe there's a different solution. And so basically what he's doing is he is saying, okay, well, maybe there's a difference between infinite pasts and infinite past histories, or finite pasts and finite past histories. And so what he's able to say basically is, well, it's perfectly consistent to have an infinite number of causes. What you can't have is an infinite number of causes that are linked together, right? And so the way he talks about how like we can break up where there's this scrambling event or whatever, right, between universes or between movies, right, is basically drawing a distinction where it's like you can have an infinite number of causes that like occur, but they aren't all in a causal chain from like cause A to cause B to cause C. Instead, we have cause A to cause B, and then separately cause C to cause D, and we can do that like an infinite number of times, such that we're still able to talk about the reality that we inhabit, right? Because we just happen to be in like one section of the causal chain, right? But then there are breaks in that chain, such that it doesn't matter that there are an infinite number of causes. It isn't like there is an infinite number of causes before us that has led us to this moment that way you have to trace back. It's there's a finite number of causes that we have to trace back, even though there could be an infinite number of causes total.
Why this is more of like a language or model version rather than a metaphysical version is the metaphysical version puts constraints on like the physical facts. Like there's a finite number of reapers, there's a finite number of stuff. But notice that what I've done is I've just like introduced a little subtle thing that says, well, look, I'm not going to touch the physical things like the reapers or how much stuff is here. I'm just going to acknowledge that due to problems of language, models, and so on, we just might not be able to talk about them all at once. Like it's trying to talk about them at the same time that's causing an issue. And so if we can break this up into finite chunks and say I'm going to talk about this chunk and this chunk and this chunk and this chunk, um, our language does a lot better because we can break it up into a bunch of finite problems rather than one infinite one all at once. And the question is like, but yeah, it's an infinite number of finite problems. Like, yes, but any solution to the problem we happen to care about, if it doesn't depend on solving the other problems, the fact that there's an infinite number of problems we could solve isn't super relevant to us, right? Because if I just want to figure out what happens in interval, I don't know, 56, there's like an interval for each integer or something. The fact that I don't know the solution for the interval at every integer doesn't matter because I can still just look at 56 isolated and get what I want. And so that gives us the best of both worlds. It allows us to talk about things in a finite sense, but I don't have to like make any commitments about like how much of things there are.
What would you call your view?
I think a statement I've been using to distinguish this, and I think it helps. I've been calling it model finitism instead of causal finitism because causal is in terms of like metaphysical stuff, like what stuff is causing other stuff. I'm agnostic about how much causal stuff there is in the whole system and whatever. But my prediction is that we're gonna have to model it in finite chunks and be able to take it one chunk at a time to kind of solve it. So the model is gonna have to scale down to our language, and I'm just gonna be agnostic about all the extra causal baggage that goes along with it. You could think of it like a spectrum, right? So at like one far end, you've got like pure finitism like Craig. This isn't just like causal finitism. It's like no, there only exists a finite amount of stuff ever, right? That's Craig's like baby. And then you've got like causal finitism before that, where it's just like, there can exist some infinite number of stuff if you're a mathematical Platonist or whatever, but there can never exist infinite numbers of causal interactions like all at the same time. And um, then you can go like a little further back and say, well, actually, right? There could exist a whole bunch. There could exist an infinite number of causal interactions. They just have to kind of like what's the word I'm looking for? They have to like truncate themselves to the extent like you can look at them finitely amount of chunks at a time, right? There's like a scale you can keep going further back until you get maybe like to unsatisfiable pair or something that's just like skeptical the whole thing, where it's like some things are inconsistent, but we don't care. We're just not going to say anything further than that. You can't make us take a position at like the extreme skeptical end. And so you can think of like kind of like a spectrum.
All right, so we're just about at the 30-minute mark here, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the episode. We should be able to wrap things up next time with talk about the unsatisfiable pair diagnosis and get into a little bit of technical talk using logic, but Logos walks us right through that, so it really shouldn't be that bad to understand. And I am hopeful that we will be able to wrap up this series in the next episode, so stay tuned for that.